Hi everyone, today's lecture is on CSS fonts. It's a very brief lecture. It's just to kind of cover the topic of what happens when you have lots of different or special kinds of fonts that you want. So this is a really straightforward topic, doesn't take very long to cover, and basically it's like you might have a really simple HTML file, right? Like this, and it's a straightforward file. It's like you have a body with just an H1 element, you have an actual style definition here, which styles that H1 element, and all it does is set the font family to a fairly simple font like Arial, right? So if we open this in the web browser now, like this, you can see that we have a font of Arial. And if I was to get rid of this, for instance, you could see the font would change. Now it's Times New Roman, which is the default. I could also do other ones, like I think George is a valid font. And this all works because these font faces or font families are, well, firstly, like where do they exist? They're not installed on browsers, they're actually installed on the computer. So on most computers, this is just on Windows. I can just open fonts. This is just on my personal machine. And these are all the fonts built in. So we could actually use some of these. So we say, oh, that one looks nice. Berlin Sans FB. Let's try and use that one. Berlin Sans FB. Great. So what's actually happening with fonts is that the browser is relying on the operating system to provide the fonts. And you could actually install more fonts onto your operating system. However, one of the problems with this is that how do you know if everyone has your font? Because some people's operating systems or versions of it might not have a certain font that you're interested in using. And this can create a lot of compatibility problems. That's why a lot of websites tend to use really basic fonts like Arial, Times New Roman, and not things like Berlin Sans FB, even though it's kind of cool and kind of interesting. And again, like honestly, you'll see this sometimes. You'll maybe design a page and you'll send it to a friend and everything will look weird, because if the font family isn't right, if you've picked a font family, it's incredible how broken a page looks, like how stylistically relevant the font is to the overall aesthetic of the page. So there's the problem, compatibility problem. In recent years, I can't remember specifically, browsers started to become capable of essentially installing fonts directly into the browser, and then it also became easier to download fonts, and that's what I'm going to show you with this example. So if you have a font you really like, or maybe you want like a really fancy font, what you can do, and these slides are pretty straightforward, they're pretty much like, you can go to Google Fonts, that's where this links. And you can look through this and you can look, okay, I want a pretty font. These are all of, this is like Google's font library. And here's a really nice one. Akaya Televagala, something like that. So I can click on it and I get a ton of detail. I get to see what this font looks like at a range of pixel sizes. Because remember, a font is kind of like an instruction as to how to draw something. So like the base vector of each character in the set, there's glyphs as they're referred to. These are just kind of vectors, and your browser will actually scale them up and down. So all your browser really needs is these fundamental glyphs, which are again just vectors. They're not images. They're actually kind of like SVG types, if you think about it like that. I think there's an image lecture you can go and look at. But yeah, so if you like this font, you could also write some things like, hello COMP6080 students, isn't this a nice font? Okay, it doesn't look too bad. I mean, to be honest with you, the zeros kind of look a bit stupid, but anyway, let's say we like this one. So we go download family. Now this is actually going to download it to my local machine, and it stores it inside of, so this is it downloaded here. Right, so, and this is the actual font. So TTF, OTF, I think there's a few other font types. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to copy this into our folder here. So you can see that this sample file that we've been running is actually inside the CSS fonts folder. So I'm going to copy that inside the CSS fonts folder. So I just copied it in the CSS fonts folder and now it's here. Now this is all gibberish, right? You can't understand this. And because it's in the file system now, we can actually import it, right? So we could, I think the samples are pretty easy. If you ever forget them, you can just Google them, like web browser import font, right? And you'll get some pretty like straightforward processes. You know how like you can import like an image or something like that? You can actually do the exact same things with fonts, where you can define your own font face. So what that means is inside of your CSS, you know you have this Berlin Sans FB. Berlin Sans FB is a font face. The actual font or the glyphs that it's using are just kind of default system ones, right? So the browser's just like, all right, I'll go look for a font of this name. But if you're importing one, because you've included it in a folder here, you actually have to instruct the browser, no, don't look for this on the system. Look for this, like don't look for this in the client's computer's operating system. Look for this, like I'm going to provide you with the data. So I'm going to define a font face here. Right? And you can see that I give it a name. Let's call this COMP6080 fave, or like, yeah, COMP6080 fave. And then I give it the URL. Now in this case, the URL is just going to be this file name here. Because it's all like a relative path, so it's just like you're importing an image or a CSS background or something like that. So let's see if this works. I might have got a specific detail here wrong. This is us creating a font face called COMP6080 fave. If I want to use this COMP6080 fave, this is now the font family I choose, like this. And now we get it. That's it. That's all there is. So this is actually importing it from this file here. Right, so if this was a web server, it would be looking to this file to actually get the font. You'll see if I try and load it, my browser doesn't like it. But it's actually loading it from another file, just like you're importing a CSS file, a JavaScript file, an image, and then it's setting that font family. It's setting a font face with this name, COMP6080 fave, to be usable, and then we can use it. And this is really helpful because it allows you to package fonts you like into your actual application, because no matter what system fonts people have installed, no matter what's in their folders, because you're providing it to them, everything works. Obviously there are some really old browsers that don't do font imports and stuff, which is why sometimes you'll see they'll do this as well, where it's like font families like my font, and they'll give you a few, and this is actually kind of like primary font, backup font, backup font. So like what I could do here is, because I'm worried that maybe someone might be using my website on a very old web browser, I'll give it a backup font of Arial. Now obviously this isn't going to work here because I have a new browser just like all of you, but you could see, for instance, if there was a problem with the network, maybe they couldn't actually download the file, or they're using an old browser, it would basically then default to Arial, which might be a nicer font than, say, defaulting to Times New Roman, like that. So yeah, while we're here, I think it's important just to mention that we're not really going into a ton with fonts here, but one of the older general rules that exists is your I'm not going to get into font theory here, but your fonts that like this, the Arial fonts, the ones without all the little squigglies, they tend to be really great for headers and titles and kind of labels and buttons and stuff. Whereas it's kind of more common to, I'm not sure if I have to, yeah, it's kind of more common to use fonts like these with the little twirls and flicks, which is why people don't like them. These ones tend to be used a bit more for like body text. I think there's some interesting research about how it's easier on the eyes. So like if I just go to the Sydney Morning Herald's website, they sometimes do this. I mean, there's even a movement away from this now, where like even most kinds of some kinds of websites won't use this. So you'll see here that, for instance, I think it's the case. Yes, I wonder what font this is. Let's have a look. Font inherit. Well, that's not very useful. Well, we're gonna computed. Let's do computed. Where is it? Font. Oh god, I've lost it. Where is it? Just relax. Font family. PT Serif, Georgia. So what is PT Serif? PT Serif's a font. Yep, and you can see it's like a little bit, it's kind of it's an interesting one. It's kind of like a softer middle ground here. You know, you've kind of got, I think Times New Roman is a little bit harsher on some of those little curls and flicks as you see there. This one looks a little bit softer, but it doesn't quite have the same rigidity as Arial. But anyway, you can go look up some font theory in your own time. But in general, if you're a front-end developer, you're usually going to get told what font to use by your designer, because certain fonts are appropriate for different situations. Sometimes fonts are particular branding guidelines as well. Sometimes whole companies will just use a certain font that's non-standard, and you'll use that in pretty much all scenarios. So anyway, you can find a font you like online, plug it into your website, make it widely available.